My first question to you is, what is your assessment on the current situation and tensions between India and Pakistan, since India is responding to the escalation and attack that Pakistan did on India on 22nd April by killing innocent tourists in Pahalgam? What is your assessment?
Yes, well, I mean, it's clear that there has been a very, very serious escalation over the last few days, and it's notable that the US administration now, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, are becoming involved in efforts to de-escalate. My own view, at least, is that, I think alarmism would be mistaken. The kind of reports which are saying, well, two nuclear armed powers are now on the edge of warfare. This is exaggerated. We've seen in the past episodes of, back and forth response between the sides. And this is another of those. But my view is that what I think a lot of the coverage is missing is the origins which led to this escalation, namely the apparent practice by Pakistan of the use of proxy Islamist terror groups, actually, as tools of policy. And this, I think, is what India is reacting against. And I think it's important that that crucial point should not get lost in terms of the way of reporting of saying, well, it's important now to de-escalate. Of course, de-escalation is good, but it's important to remember also why the escalation is taking place in the first place.
Right. Jonathan, while India has targeted terror infrastructure under the Operation Sindoor that it has launched, Pakistan is attacking civilians, including children, in heavy cross-border shelling in India, like the one we saw yesterday night. What is your assessment on that?
First of all, it's worth noting that Pakistan, of course, is denying that, and Pakistan is also claiming that a mosque has been hit and so on. So there's a great deal of, there is a certain sense of the fog of war in these situations where it can take some time before we get a really clear picture of exactly what is going on. Having said that, I would like to add that obviously in the case of the Pahalgam terror attack, which triggered this whole episode, there we saw the deliberate targeting of civilians and deliberate butchery and murder of civilians, actually, and in the most brutal of ways. And it does appear that the Republic of Pakistan is willing to make use of these kind of organizations as a tool of policy. So in this regard, I think that there is a clear ethical distinction to be drawn in terms of the visible practices of the two states, regardless of, the confusion currently, I think, which is there because of the fog of war which descends. In terms of when tit for tat, when exchanges of fire are taking place, as we're seeing in the last 72 hours.
Right. Jonathan, Israel was attacked by Hamas on October 7th, which India called it as a terrorist attack. Yesterday,
yes.
As Pakistan launched airstrikes in several Indian regions, its army used cheap rockets and was behaving like Hamas terror group. Incidentally, there were reports of a meeting between ISI and Hamas operatives in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Yes.
What is your comment on that?
Well, first of all, if we look at the background to the organization which carried out the attack, the murder of the 26 individuals, the Pahalgam, which launched all this, we know that it is an organization that calls itself TRF, or the Resistance Front, and that this is really a front organization, actually, which emerged in 2019 from the circles of Lashkar-e-Taiba organization and Hizb al-Mujahideen organization. And these two organizations are Islamist terror groups with a very similar ideology and a very similar praxis to that of Hamas among the Palestinians. Of course, there are some ideological differences, but broadly they belong to the same school. So it is not surprising that we can see these similarities also in practice, as they derive from similarities in ideology and in goals and in beliefs. Regarding ISI and Hamas, yes, we've heard many reports of this kind, and I think these are very much worthy of further research. It's known that Hamas has very close relations, of course, with Iran. It also has very close relations with Turkey, and we are familiar with the fact that Turkey and Pakistan have increasingly close relations, based maybe also on common interests, but also, again, on a very similar ideological outlook between the governments of Pakistan and of Turkey. So it's quite feasible and not hard to believe that ISI, a crucial, of course, agency within the Pakistani state regarding the support for proxy Islamist terror groups, could also be reaching out to Hamas. And I think this is very much worthy of further research and investigation.
Jonathan, since you mentioned about the close relationship that Turkey and Pakistan have, just a short while ago, there was a press briefing by India where it said the Turkish drones were used against India. And also, since Jews have themselves been victim of terrorism, we saw what happened during 26/11. Thakur Rana was extradited this year only. How do you think that, it is important for the countries, it is right time for the countries to expose Pakistan, which is shielding terrorists?
Well, I think, yes, I think it's long overdue, actually, that Pakistan should be exposed for this very dangerous and negative practice. It is, after all, fully 15 years now, nearly 15 years now, since the Al-Qaeda leader and mastermind of 9/11, Osama bin Laden, was found by the United States forces to be hiding in Abbottabad, very close to Pakistani military facilities. So this practice is of long standing. It is deep-rooted. The Pakistani practice of use of proxy Islamist terror organizations as a tool of policy resembles a similar practice by the Republic of Turkey and also by Islamic Republic of Iran. This is absolutely an unacceptable mode of behavior on the international stage, and it is past time that it begins to be exposed, and also that responsible members of the international community act to put an end to this practice.
Right. Jonathan, just last question. How do you see the global response that India is getting in terms of it fighting against terrorism? Also, how do you see the Western nations, especially the reportage by Western media, calling terrorists as gunmen? What is your comment about the Western media's propensity for neutral coverage when reporting events outside Europe and the Anglosphere?
Yes, I think that's a very apt question. It is unfortunate regarding Western coverage that when terrorist organizations, including Islamist organizations, target Western targets and Western civilians, then there's no shyness about describing them as terrorists. But when they're targeting non-Western populations, then the desire for, as you said, for objectivity, so-called, and neutrality, and seeing the views of both sides suddenly comes onto the agenda. I think it's very mistaken. Not only is it incorrect, but it's also not good reporting, because the fact of the matter is that the reason for the current escalation is because of Pakistani support and sponsorship of Islamist terror organizations. So to miss that out, in fact, is to be doing poor reporting. It's not being objective. It's simply being omissive of a major factor, or the major factor in the picture. And I think it reflects also Western policy, where we see an instant jump towards the need for de-escalation, the need for both sides to behave responsibly, and so on and so forth. This is all very well. Of course, nobody wants escalation, but it's very vital, I think, to present a clear picture here as to what the factors actually are which have led to the escalation in the first place.
Perfect. Jonathan, thank you very much for speaking with ANI. And just reconfirming, I'll refer you as Jonathan Spire, Director of Research at the Middle East Forum, and your location is London, United Kingdom.